Welcome back, and still celebrating International Youth Day here on New Central TV. We just finished a conversation with Dr. Faith Wobia, who is founder and president Youth Global here in Nigeria. And the conversation continues, of course, celebrating youth across Africa and across the world.
And it's been an amazing, talk. Like what Dr. Faith said, his initiative is, taking the steps. So we're not just depending on the government alone, on the individuals alone. It's a collective effort, and good to see that these initiatives are being taken.
Absolutely. And now let's bring in our next, of course, the people joining us in the next conversation. We have Gaia Ben Mbarek, who's a freelance journalist who's joining us from Tunis in Tunisia. Good morning, Gaia. Thanks for joining us.
Having me.
Okay, and we also have Trevor Shaku, who's a national spokesperson of SAFTU from Joburg, South Africa. Good morning, Trevor. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, and thanks for having us.
Good morning, Trevor. It's a pleasure to have you, and happy International Youth Day.
Thank you.
All right, I think we can start with, talking about the theme, the generic theme for this year's International Youth Day, which is intergenerational solidarity, creating a world for all ages. Trevor, in the simplest terms, how would you explain what that is?
In most instances, for instance, we take our cue from what Frantz Fanon would have said many moons ago, that generations must find their missions and try to fulfill them. But because history does not develop on the dictates of one generation, but develops from one generation to another, and there's always cross-cultural, cross-generational and intergenerational overlaps between these generations in every historical epoch. So it necessitates that in every epoch, the missions to take society forward, be it in economy, be it in politics, ought to be intergenerational, because it involves the cross generations of the old and the young, always taking baton together to take the struggles, especially in Africa, taking the struggles of the working people forward. And for us, the meaning of this International Youth Day, where we say that intergenerational solidarity, we think for us as the South African Federation of Trade Unions, that merely means that the generations of old workers and generations of new workers, young workers, the generations of old peasants and the generations of new peasants must together carry the baton to struggle to take themselves out of poverty.
Okay, now we have Gaia with us now. I think she's stable. So Gaia, I'm going to be bringing you in on the conversation. Now, one factor that we have not talked about enough is the factor of ageism. When it comes to intergenerational gap, there is this ageism in between that is hindering the older generation from connecting to the younger generation. So how do you think that this factor can be taken out to bridge that gap between the older generation and the new generation?
I think the key word here is definitely strategy. Having a strategy that is focused on inclusiveness of all generations from different backgrounds, from different social classes, and eliminating actually these gaps that exist amongst youth themselves and amongst the older generations and young people. Today, in today's world and in the current circumstances that we are going through, the goal needs to be towards outlining and achieving social justice for everyone, from young people to the older generation. Now, today, the problem is that we have young people that are out there that are trying to make change into their community, but the issue is that in their country strategies, there are no inclusivity. So young people find themselves as a mere number as part of any initiative that is being put out there. Today's, whether it is governments or whether it is at the international level, need to give the platform for youth to be active and to move from being just a passive member of their community towards acting upon the ideas that they share with them, towards being decision makers, because we saw in various countries around the world that it is possible for youth to lead nations, and it is possible for youth to have their own thoughts implemented into actual governmental plans, into actual change factors into their own communities. So why not us in Africa having that happen and actually going beyond our traditions and our very much like hierarchical societies where young people are always considered as much less and as not, let's say, not aware enough or not mature enough, rather, in order for them to have their own thoughts heard. And in order to lead nations, however, it's definitely now the time in order for us to empower youth realistically and move away from mere slogans and mere electoral campaigns tool.
Well, good place to leave it there. Talking about moving away from media slogans and hashtags and some of all of that, and getting into proper action. And that's where I want to bring back Trevor Shackle here. The ageism that Blessings had spoken about, a lot of the narrative across Africa really is that the young people aren't ready. They are not, prepared enough. And that's why we still have people in their 70s, in some countries 80s, still in governance and still holding on to governance. And so, Trevor, I want your response to those who say the young people across Africa aren't ready. They have many other things that they're involved with, and so, whenever it is they're able to pull themselves together, maybe we'll give it to them. Do you agree that they are not?
I disagree. I do not agree that we are not ready. I think in all spheres of life, young people have demonstrated that they are ready to lead, and that is the reason why you see them in the face of protests, be in the face of trade unions in most instances. And of course, as you said, there are insistences amongst the old generations, especially those who led us to independence and freedom and liberation in Africa. They are clinging onto the resources, they are clinging onto power, they are clinging onto the space and crowding it out and leaving none space for the youth. And the youth that they only, for instance, are able to bring into the space is those which are in cahoots with them, and they are able to use them for their own means. And this is because these generations of old liberation fighters who are refusing to give us young people in Africa an opportunity to lead, an opportunity to play a role in society and in building this society. In the main, because they've created comfort zones for themselves, in which the reproduction of power, both economically and politically, is for the perpetuation of their own families and crony syndicates, which operates in most instances in the political spaces in the country.
Okay, Trevor, let me still ask you this, still talking about, the readiness of the youth. Now, there's this debate that the youth use a coping mechanism when it comes to issues that bother on the society. So something is going on in politics and, in the economy, and you see the youth on social media trying to, bring out humor out of the situation, trying to just distract themselves from what is happening. Now, do you think that this is enough reason? Like I said, it's a debate that is ongoing. So do you think it's enough reason to say that the youth are not ready to take up the challenges?
No, it is not. And remember, if you look around, and I think it is the mechanism of every human being to try to make fun out of situations, to try to cope with various situations which are depressive, and they will try to adapt to certain mechanisms. And some of those is to try to create jokes around various other issues. But that does not mean the youth is not ready. If you look at, and for instance, it will not be the entire youth which is having its interest in politics or having its interest in hardcore economics and economic strategies and policies of the country and how to take it forward. Other youth have their interests in entertainment, and that's where their talents are. And that should not be used, in my view, to then deny all the youth the opportunities that they require in order to play the role in political and economic spheres. And if you look across the continent for that matter, you'll realize that the youth is in every sphere of life, from politics, from trade unions to economy. And they are in NGOs, they are the ones leading there. Now, such is merely, in my view, such is merely an excuse to try to cling on to power, to cling on to positions without giving and creating space for us. These people are pensioners, some of them. We, of course, value the knowledge that they carry. And we think if some of them still can execute these duties with efficiency and with competence, they still must come and be with us. And there will be skills and knowledge transfer in between. And that is the reason why the intergenerational solidarity, not only in leading, but also in various other spheres of life where, for instance, working class people are struggling to get out of poverty. So we need that particular solidarity to be able to move forward as society, because history does not stick to the silos of generational missions, but history combines. History is created by all people of various generations, of various ages, and as a result, by nature, history is intergenerational.
All right, thanks a lot, Trevor. Let's bring in Gaia Ben Mbarek to the conversation. I want you to now, of course, go deeper into enabling African youth. There is a lot that people would argue that African youth, are lacking with regards to empowerment. So I want you to speak with regards to that. If you're going to be addressing governments, heads of government across African countries, what would your message be to them? That they need to put in place to enable African youth.
It's definitely, there are young people across the region and across the African continent that are well equipped and are ready enough in order to lead and in order to actually implement whatever ideas they have. My message to African leaders would be regarding the fact, allow us in, give us the opportunity to act upon the ideas that we have in mind, to actually implement the strategies that we have in mind, instead of just using us as a tool for whatever electoral campaigns that you have or for whatever plans you have. It is important for young people to be involved in the decision-making process and to be involved in whatever political dynamics that exist in one country in order to actually grow as a nation, grow as a generation, and also to make the idea of social inclusivity and social justice available, because you cannot be talking about developing as a nation or about social justice plans and achieving and socioeconomic rights without including an entire generation that a majority of that generation is actually putting their lives at risk.
Okay, now let me also bring in Trevor. Trevor, what would you say the youth themselves can do? Now, we're still talking about enabling the youth. What would you say, what are the actions you think they can take to be more visible, to allow them be enabled, be involved in the decision making? Trevor, are you there?
Yeah, well, might have having connection challenges there, but of course the conversation continues. We're talking all about the International Youth Day, and of course, if you're just joining us, we just we still are on a conversation with Gaia Ben Mbarek, who's a freelance journalist in Tunisia, and Trevor Shako, the national spokesperson of SAFTU in Joburg, South Africa. And it's generally about how we can have more empowered youths. In what ways can we change the conversation concerning the young people across the continent? And in what ways can we give them more power, open up more spaces where they can feel in? The ageism thing that you spoke about, it's a legitimate challenge across Africa because
It is because they keep saying that the young ones are the leaders of tomorrow, but the leaders that we have tomorrow are not bringing the young ones along. So how do they come to lead tomorrow? It's just like apprenticeship.
Yeah.
You don't carry them along. There's no way they can learn. So we need to get rid of that barrier, that ageism gap in between, and then just fill it up.
absolutely. And there's so many other ways, so many ways that young Africans can show themselves. Aside, there's governance and science and technology. There's so many other, ways that it can get involved. But there's also people who have the fears that, and this is something I feel that we should maybe also talk about in the course of this discussion. How different are they from the people that they're trying to replace? I hope that I can bring in Gaia and Trevor to speak on this. Some people would argue that these young Africans that you speak about aren't very different. They're pretty much the same person, just in a younger body. That of course brings a lot of emotions. People like to fight, when you bring up stuff like that. But people have strong arguments like that, and I would like to hear what they think. And also, we're going to talk about it, and some of the things that we will be talking about in the course of the discussion, aside enabling African youth, let's just talk about the distractions. Let's talk about social media. Let's talk about the brain drain, migration to other countries. How much of the values of the young, very vibrant Africans are we losing to other countries?
When it comes to the issues concerning the youth,
yes,
when it comes to the issues concerning the youth, there are a lot of conversations going on. Now, we know that youth have the creativity. We've seen these things on social media, youth coming up with different ideas. But like you said, there seemed to be a distraction. They seem not to know how to draw the line, not to know what to use their abilities for. So we see someone who is very creative and we see him doing something different than what he originally should be doing. So these are conversations that we need to tackle to make the youth understand what they should be doing. I mean, it's in place for you to want to have fun and all of that, but do not get totally distracted by the fun of social media.
Absolutely. We have Trevor Shackle back joining us. Welcome back, Trevor.
Thanks.
Okay, so I want you to get into something I brought up now. What we're focusing on now is enabling African youth. And I would like that we also get back there and speak mostly about in what ways they can be enabled. Does it have to be financially? Does it have to be with moral support? Does it have to be with science and technology and some of all of that? But I want you to address, a thought that some people have, might be 5 people across the continent, but I want you to address it. The one that says that the young people across Africa now aren't very different from the leaders that are in their 80s and in their 90s, that they are really just the same personalities in younger bodies, and if they got into power, they will do pretty much the same thing.
And got older, yeah.
Yes, I agree. The youth, for instance, I am given a huge responsibility in speaking for the second biggest federation in the country, and I'm executing that, I would like to believe, to the best of my ability. And I try to mold myself in the manner in which it's befitting to take the organization forward. And I think the youth in Africa, and I've seen the youth, my colleagues, my peers rather, in this country, and I think I've come across other colleagues in other African countries who are really excelling in various spheres of life. So the first one indeed would be to enable them. But enabling them can take 2 ways. Firstly, if it is in the context of this system, the capitalist system, the neocolonial capitalist system in the country, in the continent at the current moment, you would have to indeed enable them, those who want to explore business enterprises. You'd have to ensure that there is money available for those young people to be able to start their own businesses, to be able to take their businesses to higher levels. We have seen in the country, and actually even in the continent, young people already find with entrepreneurial passions already starting businesses, textile businesses to produce food, to produce shoes, to produce clothes and all that. We've also seen some of the most innovative minds in the continent also trying to make the newest innovations in the latest technological advancement in which we are living in. And these people have these business ideas, which in my view would require our governments to be able to support them in many ways. One, in enabling the legislative environment that enables them to do business properly and with support. But second, secondly, the financial part of it, because there is no business in a capitalist system that can start without money. For instance, even the very basic, the very basic formula for capitalism is MCM, money, commodities, money. And that on its own shows you that you are not going to get anywhere without that particular money. If we learn from, for instance, from Japan, after the Second World War, the Japanese government was able to push various brands like your Toyota today, your Sony, which you see today, your Canons and them, was able to push them because it was able to pump and enable financial assets for these people who were studying these particular businesses. But again, if you come to moral question of it, indeed, because of the era in which we are living in, where we are living in a particular era and our parents lived in a particular era, if there is any form of moral rejuvenation that ought to be carried out, indeed, in my view, you would have to do that. The sheer violence, the senseless violence that we see across the continent would have to stop. People would have to start developing compassion for their own fellow human beings. But generally, and these are the greatest points I want to make, is that the difference in class structures and class stratification in our societies have actually been the ones which are at the root cause of the inequalities which we see today. And these inequalities are the ones which are reproducing the socio-cultural problems and the socio-cultural environment that we see at the current moment. So you're going to have to deal with the political economy of Africa before you want to rejuvenate moral regeneration or try to assist our youth to be focused. You are going to have to change the plumbing, the very foundation, the very economic foundation of this continent in order to be able to take this continent forward, but most importantly, empower its youth to be able to play a very meaningful and significant role towards its development.
Okay, now Trevor, let's focus on Africa and let's put the level of youth involvement and enablement on a scale. How well would you say the youth of Africa are being involved in the decision-making mechanism of the continent?
For instance, in the Pan-African Parliament, there are youth which I would have seen in there, and they would obviously be operating within the limits of that particular parliament, which in my view already are limited in many senses. But most importantly, to look at them at the continental level, you are not going to find structures that, in my view, would be key decisive in changing the power structures of this continent, and especially where the youth plays a particular role. In most instances, most of the power structures still remain with the sovereign countries within Africa itself. So that's where one in the main can be able to make assessment as to whether the youth is able to make important and participate in important decision-making bodies in the continent or not. But secondly, we are going to have to look at the very limitations of the capitalist system in the country, the neoliberal, neocolonial capitalist system in this continent. Because in our view, so much as a parliament, for instance, is an instrument of the class rule, and in this instance, the ruling class is the bourgeois. And unfortunately, because at the time when we arrived at independence, we had not been able to develop the bourgeois enough in the continent. It means we are still operating under the tutelage of imperialism. That is the reason why they bring green energy structural adjustments. For instance, in the country where I am at the current moment, there is green structural energy adjustments which are being imposed from IMF, World Bank. And I would also believe that this is the trend across Africa. The question is, are these youth executing their powers? Are they executing their agency to change the political structures, the political terrain and trajectory of Africa from within the structures of neoliberal capitalism, of neocolonial capitalism? Or are they trying to look for alternative centers of power through which they will reclaim Africa and Africa for the development and the benefit of its people at large? Because at the current moment, Africa is rich, its resources are too many, but unfortunately, only a tiny elite is benefiting from the wealth of this continent.
That's really sad, really, and that's something that probably needs to change as quickly as possible. I also want you to speak with regards the power of social media and how that may also play a pivotal role in enabling African youth and the young people across Africa. In what ways have things been different, maybe in the last 10 years, with regards to social media's influence? And also, if you can, talk about the brain drain. With young Africans leaving the continent, moving elsewhere, in search of greener pastures, how much damage is this also doing to, the values that the African youth can offer to the continent?
Let me start with the brain drain. In as far as the brain drain is concerned, it is my interest to start tracing it at the root. And at the root, my view is that you would hear many young doctors, many young engineers leaving Africa and African countries to overseas because they say that other countries overseas are offering better packages, payment packages, and benefit packages for them. And they are leaving our public hospitals, they are leaving our schools, they are leaving our clinics, they are leaving our state-owned enterprises. And the reason why these state-owned enterprises, public institutions, are not able to offer good packages to these young people who eventually, because of the poverty that they are living in, despite the immaculate qualifications and skills that they acquire and possess, is because the neoliberal, and I'm going there again, the neoliberal fiscal policies, unfortunately, of African countries have been determined in the way that the African countries are meant and pushed not to spend onto their economies. And as a result, they try by all means to cut expenditure into public service and public good provision. And as a result, these workers who are working in these public institutions do not get proper wage raises, do not get proper benefits at work. And also, the very working environments are not conducive for them to be able to execute their skills there. And as a result, these young people end up running away because they feel, for instance, one teacher was telling me that he spent 4 years, I think, in Abu Dhabi, somewhere there. He said to me he left the public education in the country because they were offering good packages there. And within 3 years of being there, he was able to send money home to buy a car, to buy a house. This is, in the main, a question of resources and how much the government is willing to spend into the public services in their own African countries. And because they are on a neoliberal fiscal policy framework, they will never be willing to spend more into the public services, and as a result, they will keep on losing these young people who should be otherwise investing their skills and expertise in developing our continent. But secondly, in as far as how can the youth use social media to their own advantage, I think we've seen a number of talents mushrooming into the public space because of social media. For instance, you have podcasts developing everywhere, and these are bringing even authentic voices into first journalism, but secondly into commentary on social and cultural issues and political issues which are engulfing this particular continent. So already we can see the positive of this particular social media, but more so, especially from the trade union angle, mine is that the social media must also be able to be used properly by the youth to organize against the billionaire who currently are holding the wealth of this continent. For instance, in the country, the World Bank report released early this year in February said that the 80% of wealth in this country, South Africa, is only owned by 10% of South Africa's population, meaning that the rest of the 90% of the population is sharing and scrambling for 20% of the country's wealth. And the rest of the African continent is like that. The rest of all other parts of this continent are like that. So the question here is a question of one elite, a tiny percentage of the elite being able to own these means of production, hoard wealth, and at the expense of our people. So beyond the social media being expression of talent, bringing authentic voices and giving young people a platform to bring out new and innovative ideas, I would like to see social media being used by those in social organizations, those in civic movements, community organizations, political parties, and in particular trade unions, to be able to organize a better alternative to fight against the elites who are currently milking us dry in the continent.
All right, Trevor, very salient point you raised there about the organizations coming up with those initiatives. Now, let's talk about the level of unemployment, especially in Africa, because if we're being true to ourselves, this is one of the major distractions for the youth. Now, the youth are the largest proportion of the African continent, with over 70% of them being under 30. Now, if these set of people remain unfed, remain unemployed, I don't think that there is any reason for them to be motivated to want to, take more steps towards building a society when their homes are, so to say, in shambles. So what would you say about the unemployment level as it relates to the level of enablement for the youth on the African continent?
Thank you for the question. The unemployment on its own, we have seen its devastating consequences. The premise should start here, in my view. One, we are living in a capitalist system. In a capitalist system, you cannot survive if you do not have an income, because capitalist system is a system predicated on the production of commodities. What are commodities? Commodities are goods which are produced primarily for exchange. That means one must have a particular note or coin to be able to access a particular service or good in that instance. So, first and foremost, the youth that is economically marginalized by unemployment is unable to meaningfully participate in the economic life of our continent. That's the first point. The second point is that having been marginalized economically to participate in the life of the economy of the continent, these youth try to find creative ways to live. And unfortunately, some of the creative ways to live are seen through are often odious. And what do I mean by odious? I mean they often are not conventional and often are not even legal. They are very illicit in most instances, some of those creative ways. And that is the reason why you see crime. That's the reason why you see crime. That's the reason why you see violence, senseless violence increasing and on the rise in the continent. Even some of the extremists who are currently recruiting young people to join their ranks so that they can terrorize communities in Africa are actually recruiting from the communities of unemployed young people who are currently marginalized economically. And this is a serious problem for the African continent, because this is a waste of not only human resources, but expertise and skills, because some of these people are possessing the expertise from colleges, from universities. In fact, in this country, 53% of the youth who are unemployed, they are without a matric certificate. Matric is the school leaving grade. Now, on top of that, you have, I think, about 3% of them who have a tertiary qualification. They are unemployed, and some of them have 5 years being unemployed. And the rest of the continent experience the same trend. Now, this is a waste of resources. This is a waste of skills. This is a waste of human resource in particular. And this is the human resource that this continent requires. But we also must, I think, contextualize this unemployment in the political economy, as I said earlier on, because it is very difficult to be able to dissect questions like socio-cultural issues if you do not ground that in political economy. The political economy of unemployment tells us that unemployment is created first and foremost because the corporations, the capitalist enterprises, when they try by all means to maximize profits, they retrench workers in the main. And you see this because constantly they do restructuring, which leads to unemployment. But secondly, there's a new tool which the monetary and fiscal policy strategists in various countries are using. And this particular tool is called NAIRU, the natural unemployment rate. What they do is to use unemployment as a target of inflation. So they think that if you achieve full employment, then you will have rising inflation. And as a result, they deliberately craft policies that keep us unemployed in the continent.
All right, Trevor Shaku, it's a really interesting hearing you speak because you sound very knowledgeable about these things. And we thank you very much for taking our time and celebrating with us International Youth Day and for speaking with us this morning. We wish you a great day ahead and looking forward to bringing you on News Central again.
Thank you so much, Trevor. And it's unfortunate that we couldn't have Gaia join us all through because she really was doing justice to some of the questions. But all the same, we thank both our guests.
Absolutely. All right, stay with us. The conversation continues. We'll go on a short break. And when we come back, we have more of these conversations coming your way on International Youth Day here on News Central TV.